Tonight we peel back the layers of a world most people only see in headlines and fear. Forget the rumors, forget the reputation. We are talking about the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, a group many label as outlaws, but whose actions in this story paint a very different picture. This is a story about the unwritten code, the silent protection, and the moment 80 hardened riders dropped everything to answer a desperate scribbled plea. The town of Havenwood is what you'd call a quiet slice of Americana. Perfectly manicured lawns, two-car garages, and neighbors who wave from their porches. It's the last place you'd expect a nightmare to unfold, or a biker gang to ride in as saviors. Our story centers on Sarah, a single mother living in the quiet suburbs with her two children, 7-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Ethan. Sarah had tried everything to create a safe haven for her family after her difficult separation, but the quiet surface of her life was about to be violently fractured by a man who saw her family as something to control and dominate. Her ex-partner, a man named Marcus. Marcus was a master of manipulation, his presence a dark cloud that occasionally burst into destructive storms. The court orders were clear, limited supervised visitation, but Marcus ignored them, his visits becoming increasingly aggressive, fueled by a corrosive sense of entitlement and rage. Sarah lived in constant anxiety, every knock on the door sending a jolt of panic through her. She felt isolated, the system seemingly too slow or too indifferent to offer real, immediate protection. She often told herself she was strong enough to shield her children, but deep down, the fear was a constant, debilitating weight. She had no one to call, no reliable backup, only the fragile hope that Marcus would eventually tire of his game. One Tuesday night, that hope evaporated. Marcus arrived unannounced, his face contorted in a fury Sarah hadn't seen before. He was drunk, belligerent, and clearly intent on more than just argument. The children, sensing the shift from mere tension to outright danger, retreated to Lily's room, a small, shared sanctuary. Ethan, mature beyond his years, knew they had to do something. They had seen enough movies to know when the hero needed help. But how does a 10-year-old call for help when their phone is locked away and the front door is being screamed at? Ethan remembered something his late grandfather had told him, a strange story about certain people who look menacing but live by a strict code of honor, a code that includes protecting the truly helpless. His grandfather, a retired mechanic, used to do work for a few local bikers, including a man known only as Nomad, a high-ranking member of the Bandidos MC. The grandfather had mentioned a small, discreet social hall on the edge of town, a place the Bandidos often frequented. It was a long shot, a desperate grasp at a rumor, but it was their only chance. In the midst of Marcus's rampage downstairs, shouting, slamming doors, the sound of glass breaking, Ethan crept silently to his mother's desk. He found a scrap of paper, a dull pencil, and with trembling hands, he scrawled 3 harrowing words: "He's hurting us tonight." Below it, he tried to write the address, his penmanship barely legible through his fear. The note was pushed through the gap under the front door when Marcus was momentarily distracted in the kitchen, a tiny, fragile SOS launched into the dark suburban night. The note was eventually found not by a concerned neighbor, but by a passing young man on a scooter, a delivery driver who often saw the Bandidos at their hall. The sight of the crumpled note, clearly written by a child, stopped him cold. The chilling simplicity of the message, "He's hurting us tonight," was unambiguous. He knew the hall was a long shot, but he sped straight there. At the Bandidos' local chapter hall, the atmosphere was typical. The low hum of conversation, the clinking of bottles, and the smell of old leather and oil. The mood was interrupted when the delivery driver burst in, breathless and holding the soiled piece of paper aloft. He found Nomad, a massive man with a face etched by years of hard living and an intimidating handlebar mustache, standing near the bar. Nomad took the note, his eyes scanning the childlike script. The chatter in the hall died instantly. Silence fell, thick and heavy, as the 40 or so men present watched their leader. Nomad didn't speak a word. He looked at the address, a street a few miles away in the safe part of Havenwood. He looked at the 3 words. His jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, making 3 terse calls. The message was simple, relayed without embellishment. Code red. Family in distress. Meet at the corner of Elm and Maple. Now. The men in the hall didn't question it. They didn't need to. The code was the only law that mattered in that moment. Within 5 minutes, engines roared to life. This wasn't a ride for show or a club run. This was a rescue mission. Nomad and his men left the hall and sped towards the location. But 40 men wouldn't be enough. The nature of the threat, the urgent tonight, demanded overwhelming presence. Those 3 calls Nomad made went out to neighboring chapters. From the next town over, and the one after that, more members were mobilized. The message spread through the club's underground network like wildfire. One of their own, a friend's grandchild, a child in need, was in danger. Within the next 20 minutes, as Marcus's destructive rage peaked inside Sarah's house, dozens of other bikes joined the forming convoy. This wasn't just Nomad's crew anymore. It was a consolidated force. The town of Havenwood was about to experience the arrival of 80 roaring engines, a sight usually associated with trouble, but this time carrying swift, uncompromising justice. The sound started as a distant, deep thrum, barely noticeable over the suburban quiet, but it grew quickly, intensifying into a unified, earth-shaking roar that swallowed the night. In the quiet streets of Havenwood, the noise was unprecedented, a tidal wave of throbbing engines. 80 motorcycles, mostly heavy cruisers and choppers belonging to the Bandidos MC, converged on Sarah's street. The sight was startling. A massive, coordinated column of men in leather vests, their patches starkly visible under the streetlights, turning the idyllic neighborhood into a scene ripped straight from a movie. Neighbors who peered out their windows immediately retreated, locking their doors, confirming every prejudice they held about the club. They saw trouble. They couldn't possibly know they were witnessing the arrival of salvation. Inside Sarah's house, the terror was absolute. Marcus had moved from shouting to physical destruction, throwing furniture and punching holes in the drywall. Sarah, using every ounce of her strength and courage, was trying desperately to keep him away from the children's room. She was trapped, exhausted, and feeling the final edges of despair closing in. She had accepted that no one was coming. Then, the sound hit. It wasn't the police whose sirens usually whine and wail. This sound was deeper, more primal, the sound of raw, unbridled power. For Marcus, it was a sudden, jarring annoyance. For Sarah, in the brief pause it created, it was a confused moment of distraction. The convoy didn't stop in front of the house. Nomad, leading the charge, signaled the men to stop their bikes strategically, flanking the property on both sides and blocking the street. The deliberate formation was crucial. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about containment. When 80 motorcycles shut down simultaneously, the silence that follows is deafening, heavy with expectation. Nomad and a core group of 10 men, their faces grim and set, dismounted. They didn't need a formal strategy session. The rules of engagement for a code red involving children were ingrained, non-negotiable, swift, decisive. As Nomad approached the front door, he saw the small crack beneath it where the note had been slipped out. He kicked the door once, a single explosive force that splintered the frame and sent the door flying inward. The sound reverberated through the house, silencing Marcus instantly. Marcus, momentarily stunned and already drunk, staggered out of the kitchen, his eyes wide with a confused mixture of shock and aggression. He saw the towering figure of Nomad standing in the doorway, backed by 9 other massive men, all silent, all radiating a calm, focused danger far more terrifying than any outburst. "We received a message." Nomad's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, completely devoid of emotion. "The party is over." Marcus tried to bluster, puffing out his chest. "Who the hell are you? You have no right. Get off my property." The irony of him claiming the property as his own was not lost on Sarah, who finally crept out from the hallway, tears streaming down her face, relieved yet terrified of the unfolding confrontation. Nomad took 2 slow steps further into the room, his eyes scanning the destruction, the broken glass, the upturned furniture, the palpable fear clinging to the air. He completely ignored Marcus's question. "The children, where are they?" he demanded. Seeing Sarah, Marcus attempted to regain control, lunging toward her, intending to use her as a shield or a distraction, but Nomad was lightning fast despite his size. Before Marcus could even close the distance, Nomad's arm shot out, catching Marcus by the throat and slamming him against the wall with such force that the drywall cracked again. The sound was sickening. The grip was firm, non-violent in the sense that no punches were thrown, but overwhelmingly powerful. Marcus gasped, his feet dangling slightly off the ground, instantly incapacitated. Two of the bandidos, known as Viper and Stitch, moved past the paralyzed scene, their boots silent on the carpet. They went straight to Lily's room. They didn't knock. Viper spoke through the closed door, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a rough-looking man. "The noise is gone, kids. You're safe now. We're friends of your grandpa, here to help." The familiar, trusted reference instantly lowered the children's defenses. Ethan cautiously opened the door, pulling a terrified Lily behind him. When they saw the bandidos, they didn't see monsters. They saw protectors. Viper knelt down, his patch reading Sergeant at Arms, a stark contrast to the comforting warmth in his eyes. "We need you and your sister to come outside with us. There's a big group of guys out there, and they're all here just for you. We are going to make sure you get a peaceful night." He helped them wrap up in blankets. As they were led out, the sight of the two frightened children walking past the men was a silent punch to the gut for every bandido present. The confirmation of the note's truth hardened their resolve. No words were exchanged, but the silent promise of protection was absolute. The two children were escorted to a massive black SUV, not a bike, that had quietly joined the group driven by Nomad's wife, who ran a local safe house network. The separation was crucial. They needed to be removed from the scene of the trauma immediately. With the children safe, Nomad finally released Marcus, who collapsed on the floor, coughing and rubbing his bruised neck. The rest of the bandidos were now closing in, forming a tight, menacing semicircle. The time for diplomacy was long past. Now, it was about ensuring Marcus understood the severity of his trespass against their sacred code of protecting the innocent. With the children safely secured away from the immediate scene of chaos, the atmosphere inside Sarah's living room shifted from tense rescue to cold, uncompromising judgment. Marcus, rubbing his neck and finally grasping the gravity of the situation, looked up at the circle of hard, unsmiling faces. This wasn't a police confrontation, where lawyers and procedural errors could offer a lifeline. This was a private court convened by men who lived by a code older and harsher than state law. This was the reckoning. Nomad stood over him, his shadow engulfing the terrified man. "You wrote a threat," Nomad stated, his voice flat. "A man threatening a child. That breaks every rule. You put fear into the eyes of the innocent, and you shattered a home." Marcus tried to stammer out an excuse, something about stress, about Sarah provoking him, but the words withered in his throat under the collective, absolute contempt radiating from the bandidos. They weren't interested in his excuses. They were interested in a resolution that ensured this would never happen again. The club didn't engage in violence here, not the kind that leaves visible, prosecutable damage. Their power lay in their numbers, their unity, and the simple, chilling authority they projected. Nomad signaled to a bandido known as Wheels, who stepped forward holding a simple folded document. It wasn't a legal paper. It was a promise written in the language of fear and respect. Wheels placed the document on the destroyed coffee table. "This is your one warning, Marcus," Nomad continued, leaning closer. "You will vacate this property and any street within a 50-mile radius of Sarah and her children by sunrise. You will sign over all remaining legal claims to custody, effective immediately. And you will never, not for a moment, not by accident, not by proxy, attempt to contact them, look for them, or harass them again. If you breathe the same air as them, we will know." Marcus looked wildly around the room, searching for an escape, a weakness. He saw none. 80 bikes waited outside. 10 men stood inside, backed by a silent, unwavering understanding. He realized with a sickening lurch that if he refused, the consequences would be severe, permanent, and outside the jurisdiction of any court. He slowly reached for the pen, his hand shaking uncontrollably, and signed the document. A non-legally binding agreement that carried more weight than any judge's order. It was a contract with the street, and breaking it meant vanishing. As Marcus scrambled out the back door, his car keys mysteriously missing, the Bandidos remained. The immediate danger was gone, but the aftermath lingered. Sarah was still standing in the hallway, numb but safe. Nomad turned to her, his harsh expression softening slightly. He didn't offer comfort or sympathy. He offered certainty. "The problem is handled, Sarah. You won't see him again. If you do, or if anything else comes up, anything at all, you call this number." He handed her a simple business card with a single, untraceable number handwritten on the back. It was a direct line to their protection network. The cleanup was swift and methodical. The Bandidos didn't just handle the threat. They began to repair the damage. Viper and Stitch, the two men who had comforted the children, started taping the shattered window. Another group lifted the overturned furniture. They didn't speak much, working with the efficiency of men used to hard physical labor and unit cohesion. They repaired what they could, not for thanks, but because their code demanded that the family be left in a better state than they found them. It was their silent apology for the world's failure to protect Sarah sooner. By the time the sun began to paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, the street was quiet once more. The 80 bikes roared to life, a deep, resonant rumble that signaled their departure. They vanished as quickly and dramatically as they had arrived, leaving behind a family safe, a front door that was structurally intact, and a neighborhood that was utterly changed. Neighbors never spoke about the incident, but they knew one thing: that house was under protection, and the silent, heavy cruisers passing through town were now viewed with a different kind of fear, the fear of crossing them, not the fear of being harmed by them. Sarah and her children eventually moved to a new home, one where the ghosts of the past wouldn't linger. But they never forgot the sight of the leather vests, the roar of the engines, and the terrifying men who became their unexpected heroes. This story, rarely told and often dismissed as urban legend, is a raw glimpse into the unwritten code that sometimes governs the shadows of our society. It's a reminder that heroism isn't defined by the clothes you wear or the patch on your back, but by the actions you take when the desperate cry of an innocent child reaches your ears. The Bandidos MC rode in as outlaws, but they left as saviors, fulfilling a sacred obligation that transcended all else. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the true meaning of the code.